not all DISC training is created equally. I'm going to tell you why you need to hire me to work with you. So welcome back to the Help for Leaders podcast. I'm Stacey Harris. Before we jump into today's episode, I'd love for you to click here to subscribe, hit that thumbs up button, and click that bell so you're notified each week when we post a new episode. Today, I've got a special guest joining me on the episode. I've got Juan Kingsbury of Career Blind Spot. Welcome, Juan. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Juan Kingsbury, Career Blind Spot. I'll fill in, or maybe not fill in, but I do my own trainings, facilitation, and a couple times, or not a good amount of times, I've worked with Stacey and her clients for the workshop facilitation, benchmarking, applying the assessments in a variety of ways for the betterment of team building, leadership development, etc.
Yeah, so we partnered together for several years, quite a few
10
years.
plus,
yeah, 10 plus years of he comes alongside me, helping me out when I can't be in two places at one time.
You trust me enough to be
Yes.
with those clients, and I always measure of like, okay, do we do it again? So it's a high quality experience with these assessments. It's one thing to have an assessment, but to deliver the training. So that means a lot to me to be able to work with Stacey and leadership resources clients. So
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, so we're going to share some stories with you today of some success stories, some things that have worked, some things that haven't worked. And so I want to start by sharing one particular story. You've worked with this client as well, and they are a wireless company. Most of you probably have one of their devices in your pocket or in your purse. And so I've worked with them for so many years. I mean, even before there were cell phones. I mean, back when they were a paging company. And so it's been a long ride, an amazing ride. And so they have been one of my top clients for years. And several years ago, I was just going up to Dallas for the day. I mean, it was just going to be literally fly up in the morning, home that evening. And I was asked to do a just DISC training session. It was a team building for a particular team. And so I was like, great, let's do this. And so they wanted it to be done in 2 hours. And I said, no, can't be done. I won't do it. Won't do it. And I just said, no, we need more time. And so I've obviously changed everything. COVID changed everything since then. But this was my first big pivot. And so they said, well, we don't have 4 hours. I said, okay, what about 3? And they said, okay, we'll give you 3 hours in person. And I said, for 3 hours in person, everyone's going to take the assessment, and I've got pre-work. And so I had an entire PDF file that I sent that they were going to do, kind of coming into the training with knowledge.
Yeah.
So fast forward to the day of, I get on the plane. I created team graphs. It was about 24 people in the session. I looked at all the graphs, get on the plane, rent the car, drive to the location, find it. They put me in this holding room, kind of, green room type prep, because their session is going on. I realize it's a multi-day session, and I'm kind of coming in as a speaker for one segment. And I didn't realize that until, on site. And so I'm there waiting, looking at the clock, waiting. My time has come and gone, and I am waiting. And then finally, someone comes in, and I don't even know where I am, you know. And I had to have security badge me in, so I can't even leave, where I am. I mean, go find somebody. And so I'm sitting here. Finally, someone comes in and says, "The speaker ahead of you is going over. We're so sorry. We'll be here soon to get you." I'm like, okay. So I make a lot of assumptions. As a high I assume the best in people.
Yeah.
I assume the best in circumstances. So my assumption is, well, if he went over and took some of my time, that means I get to go over, because they hired me for 3 hours.
Yeah.
I get my 3 hours. Well, first of all, I walk into the room. I don't know if this has ever happened to you. There's 55 people in the room. And they all have printed out my DISC report. So by the time I created that team wheel the night before, got on the plane, flew, drove to the location.
It's 24 people.
There were 24. So like 30 more people took the assessment, which is great for me. But I am not prepared for this. And then it's a training room that has a partition down the middle of the room, and there's 2 screens, and I am a mover and walker, and I want to get in your face, and I want to talk to you and connect with you, and I'm having to move around, and there's no time for introductions. There's no time for anything. So we just jump in. Oh, and the leader that hired me said, we want this to be highly interactive. So I remember coming up with exercises of, this is a wireless company that, when the network's down, what are we going to do? Mm-hmm. And so we had all these exercises, activities, and I'm plugging along. It's going well. We pivoted, but all of a sudden, I'm told that I have 15 minutes to land the plane. And I am not, they've literally given me 2 hours.
Yeah. I
have another hour, and it's a crash landing. We land the plane. I remember calling Shane on the way back to the airport, and I was almost in tears. I was just like, I think I may have just lost our biggest client. At the time, they were one of my biggest clients. And I was just as a facilitator, as a trainer, as a business owner, I was just like, oh my gosh, that was not ideal at all. Well, I got on the plane. He calmed me down, got home. The next morning, at 8 a.m., I check my email. And I have an email from a participant. Well, I didn't meet anybody. I could not tell you one person's name that was in that training because there were so many people. And they have told me about an interaction with their family that had happened that night. Mm. His adult daughter that was estranged came over to the home and hadn't spoken to her mom, his wife, in years. And what he learned in that session that I thought was a absolute disaster was able to actually bridge the gap and help them communicate for the first time.
Oh, wow.
And not only did he, I'm like in tears reading this email, honestly. And then he not only sent it to me, but he CC'd the manager. He CC'd a VP in the organization. Like all the people that I would have want on that, eyes on that email. And I was floored. Literally, it made me rethink what you communicate in 2 hours.
Oh, yeah, that's a big deal.
Impactful, and it actually changed. I wasn't there to do family therapy or, that wasn't the intent at all. I was doing a team building session for a team that morphed into a big project. Yeah. And all of a sudden, it was just this wow moment. Yeah. And so it was, I don't know. Have you had experiences like that with teams that goes beyond what's happening in the office?
You always say, "Oh, I'm different at work and home." I'm like, I get the sentiment, but it's like, no, you're taking your disc and your driving forces wherever you go. The question is the environment or other people responding. But have you ever done a 2 hours set?
I had never done it before.
Have you decided?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I realize as much as I want to train and we have other sciences to choose from, but even just doing a disc, which I was resistant to, I'm like, what? You want peanut butter and jelly. Don't just eat the peanut butter. But sometimes peanut butter hits the spot. Yeah. And actually a lot of times, other than this in art, less is more. So I've had maybe not that heartwarming, especially the family stuff, but people realize, oh, I'm dealing this in an hour. And then I do a lot of co-working spaces. So you see people at different points. Oh, I actually realized this, or at the gym, and so you start to see these connecting of dots. Yeah. And so that's always great. And sometimes that happens. I think I was doing for marketing purposes, just kind of really quick 30-minute stuff in the virtual world of COVID on Zoom, which you talk about wanting to be in front of people's faces and being limited. Zoom, you're kind of stuck in your seat. And even those, I do stuff with Arizona State University in Phoenix, and I'll get stuff from students saying things like, and it's just from their disc and their motivators. So, time. As much as I would like to spend 8 hours, or a week, you could, and I think some people might want to. You can get a lot out of a good quality. So that says a lot about your exercises.
Yeah, it was definitely an eye opener for me. I can flex too, and I had to in the moment. They literally forced me into that, but I honestly have kind of rethought that whole timing. And then COVID has absolutely changed everything with
Yeah.
Zoom and virtual but you can't sit, I mean, because 90 minutes is about all my clients can handle on a virtual training. And so sometimes we'll do 2 90-minute sessions, but we've had to condense. It's hard to do some of those in-person activities.
Well, and you've had, maybe not the last minute switch, but didn't you have like 100 or 200 person training once? And like your preparation in that's different, which the quality, DISC is a popular concept. I'm surprised not everyone knows it, but to train it to one person, a little different than 5. Actually, I started doing, those are really great. They're less workshops and more of a leadership development / team building, because you can get it's like a mastermind.
Yeah.
But then you get your 10 to 20, but 50 changes the dynamic, 24 to 55.
Yeah.
100, especially if you start to need a microphone for everyone to hear you. And so flexing for those environments, definitely, I've learned a lot from you. And I've also realized, like, what's the outcome I want to get? It's not just here's if I see people on Jeopardy and they guess all the answers to DISC, great. But if I find out that your workplace relationships and communication is still suffering, I've provided you a disservice.
Right.
So adjusting to that for your facilitator is key, and I've learned a lot from you as well.
Yeah, and so I think that's why you want to hire us, right? Because we are all about the application of the tool. It's not just about this knowledge for knowledge's sake. That's great. That's where you start. That's a starting place, self-awareness. But it's really about, how do I apply this? How am I going to use this tomorrow? How am I going to use this in this meeting that I'm going to have with my manager that is maybe going to be stressful? So how am I going to flex? What am I going to do differently? And it's just an observable language that you can honestly make small adjustments that make big impact.
Actually,
in
I'll give a humble brag of sorts, but I worked at the company that makes the assessments, that actually does the algorithms, the programming, and I was training the trainer who trains the HR trainer internally, globally. And so, I realized, it's one thing when these people who already want to learn DISC and EQ, they come willingly. They're like the valedictorians, and I'm the motivational, history teacher. It's not to say it's hard, but it's really enjoyable. But training a bunch of reluctant account managers or busy CSRs or whatever, that's a different thing. And so when I partner with Stacy, it's like keeping that in mind of who's, not just the different audience and expectations, but like, why would they care? Because you could have 2 Heidi's, but a Heidi who's an account manager versus a Heidi who's a nurse, and how they're going to apply this and what their day looks like. So adjusting and flexing is the key word. So really passing that on from all levels. But I like to toot my own horn. I was like, I've trained the trainers who train the trainers who are really good, and they're the ones who have come to me in the past. And then that's what led to us.
Okay, speaking of train the trainer, so I do a lot of train the trainers, and that's where I met you, is when you were working at the publishers organization. But the great thing is that we partnered together. I sent you to Mexico once to do a train the trainer, because it was the week before my daughter's wedding, and I decided that that wasn't a risk that I wanted to take. As far as what if, you picked up that little amoeba and that wasn't a good time. So I
was the guinea pig.
After the fact, so I was like, yes, I will do this for you, Stacy. I'm happy to go. And then I think it was not immediately after, but it was a few weeks later that I got a phone call from Juan to confess.
Yeah.
Let's confess publicly, Juan. What did you do?
So this is just a funny anecdote.
This is so funny that I wanted to share this on the podcast.
I would love to meet you and know that if I do a training for Stacy, that preparation
We've learned
a
lot, and we are prepared now. Yes, because of this story.
Yeah, so I have had a passport since the day I was born. My dad was in the military and army, and we lived in Germany for a while. He's also from Mexico. No connection with the training, but a couple years later, I think when I was 18, it got renewed. I've always had a passport. I get married, we vacation in Mexico, have a passport. Well, you had asked me when you make sure you have a passport. I'm like, of course I have a passport.
Literally, that was the first thing I said when I asked him.
So
do you have a passport?
The point of this is I didn't have a passport, or at least a valid one. The last time I had gone was, I think, 2015 for my honeymoon. Was just fine. Apparently, it expired 2 days later or something. And I'm on my way down to Tucson. Details unimportant, but this one matters. To do a training for a bunch of pharmacists in DISC and motivators. And I decided, we're about an hour out, 10 minutes out of Phoenix. And I call my wife. I go, hey, will you grab my passport just to make sure it's there? Because I want to be thorough. Mind you, I'm a high I, very
And
low
when were
C.
you supposed to be leaving?
About 4 days later.
Okay.
4 or 5 days later. So it's like a Friday. I'm leaving the Tuesday. And she goes, yeah, I got it right here. And immediately I hit the pause. What? It's invalid. It expired X amount of days or months ago. And I'm like, no, I have a passport. And the short of it, Tucson, where we're doing the training, Phoenix to Tucson, 2-hour drive, is one of a handful of places that will get you a passport within a week. It's really hard to get.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't even know what it's like now.
Oh, it's ridiculous. Like, I know people
And
have
my
tried.
parents, this is also double shame. My mother, both my parents worked at the post office, and my mother handled passports, and she was always
Oh,
like,
my
blah, blah, blah.
goodness.
But in case of emergency, you go to Tucson, whatever. And I got one same day. So I was like, do I tell? And I'm like, you know what? I still haven't actually done this Mexico thing yet. So I go, I have a great time, great audience. And I was like, should I tell her now? Nope, I'm not going to tell her.
A wedding. She had a wedding. You were
and
like, she has enough stress on her plate
so
right
I waited
now.
until I think that Friday. When I touched down, I'm like, okay, it's done.
Yes, so he calls me and tells me this whole story of how literally for a few hours there was a panic of, I'm not going to be able to get on that plane because I don't have a passport.
Yeah, and I'm like, and I was like, if I didn't get it, I would have just said, hey, I messed this up, and I will write a letter or something. I don't know.
Well, thankfully, it all worked out.
Yeah, it did.
And we put some other things in place since then, as far as we have checklists. And it's not just, hey, Juan, do you have a passport?
Yeah.
It's, Juan, go get your passport, look
Check
at
what
that
you need to
date,
check.
make sure that it is.
Well, and it's funny, not the same degree of your story, but with the first one, you're telling about preparation and they threw things off. Like, you assume the best in people. 10 years of being an entrepreneur, I don't want to say I assume the worst, but I assume things aren't going to go according to people's plans. I'm skeptical. It's sometimes pessimistic, but I try to be skeptical of just something can knock them off.
Yeah.
You never know. On the way to the airport, something can happen. And it's not, this is an emotional intelligence conversation, but it's not so much preventing those things, but realizing, like, use your wits.
Yeah.
And when I was planning for that thing, I just, I have a passport. I remember on the phone. I'm like, I have it right here.
Yeah.
And it's like, is that enough? And so, we train this stuff. I train this stuff, and I realized I still need to work on it and use it. And especially when I'm planning new place, new country, new rules. If you don't do your homework ahead of time, it might not always ruin things, but in hindsight, you're like, oh, there's a lot I could have done to prepare to deal with this. Problems are going to happen anyway. But, as the people who take the medicine and train the medicine, I was low on my doses that day.
Well, I'm almost 30 years experience now doing this, and I can tell you, if it can happen, it will happen.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been, ill on a bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, and I'm supposed to be at 6 a.m. I'm supposed to meet them at a building, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I got food poisoning. I've had food poisoning at the hotel.
Yeah.
I have, all the things have happened.
Actually, I'll give you a short version. I realized I did something. Oh no, I told you about this. In the early days of training, filling for you, I just developed insomnia. And I finally realized, I was like, oh, I wasn't being as thorough with these clients. I knew I was going to go in and perform and do the workshops, all that stuff. But I wasn't being thorough with the relationships. And one of your trainings, I didn't sleep for a good 36 hours. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do? And I got a lot of coffee, I went for a jog, and I crushed that thing. But I'm like, oh, it's one thing to know the mechanics and the technical. It's another thing to manage the relationships and expectations. And I realized, for some reason, I think before that, when I was working at the company, other people would handle that. It wasn't not my responsibility, but now I'm like, really, I didn't have to do it. But I was like, if you do that one, you'll put your mind at peace.
So good. So good. So true. So we've been there.
Yeah.
We've done that. We've experienced all of the things that can go wrong, and we've pivoted in the moment. And we've amazingly soared through, and we've learned a lot, honestly. We've learned a lot. We've figured out where our weaknesses are, and we've got people on our team that help us make sure that we have all of the information that we need so that we can serve you, the client, as best as possible. And so thanks, Juan, for
Got it.
I didn't know about those 36 hours. This is the first time hearing about that. So thanks for sharing all of this content. I hope you've learned something. I hope you've laughed along with us. Maybe you've never experienced a disc session in a way that's transformational, like that first story that I shared. We would love to partner with you and really show you how to apply this knowledge so that you get the most out of that assessment and really see transformation on your team. Join us next week because we're going to share one more client story about how to use assessments successfully. If you enjoyed this episode and would like more information on emotional intelligence, behavioral styles, or communication, I'd love for you to click here to watch more episodes. And we'd also love for you to click here to subscribe so you're notified each week when we post more content.